Hi everyone, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can check them out at filmmakeru.com. Every week we go live at 2 p.m. with a film professional to chat and give you a chance to join us and ask questions. Today I'm joined with Jeffrey Ford, editor of Avengers Civil War, the original Avengers, and the new The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, amongst so many other great films. Hi Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Pretty good, thanks. The one I want to talk to you with about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier in terms of we started chatting about something and I was like we got to save this for the talk, but you said that because the way I've always seen television is you're working up, you're sort of almost you're cutting as the show's just starting to roll out essentially, and you said it was a bit different for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Can you give me a sense of what the cutting was like?
Well, sure. Well, I should first say that I was a helper on that show. We had the editors on that one, really amazing team. And it's one of the privileges of working at Marvel. You get to work with all these amazing actors and filmmakers. And I worked with Kelly Dixon, Todd DeRosier, and Roseanne Tan. These were amazing people who they did the heavy lifting on the show, and they were on it longer than I was. I came in to help out when the workload got busy because we had a lot to do in a short amount of time because of a COVID shutdown that caused the show to have to pause production. We had to, like everybody in the whole world, took a break from our lives, and when it came back up again, we wanted to get it out on schedule. So we had to kind of hurry because it's like a 6-hour movie, like people have been saying about the show. It does play like a Marvel movie, but it's really detailed and has all the same production values and intensity of a Marvel movie. But it's like 3 Marvel movies and they all had to be done. So there needed to be a lot of us. It was a total team effort. And we delivered it about a month ago. I mean, I'm a little bit of a blur. I'm working on another film right now, but we delivered that movie about a month ago. There's a process once you deliver the episodes. It goes through a process for distributing it to the for foreign dubbing, to get it prepared for all the different regions where it plays all over the world. All that process has to happen after we finished the show. So that last push happened about a month ago.
Yeah, if it's so you've done a ton of feature films for Marvel. So when you're trying to do a 6-hour stretch, how do you? And I mean, you'd obviously worked with the editors in this case because you were brought in afterwards. But how did you guys sort of oversee the character arcs for 6 episodes as opposed to trying to tighten it down? Like you have so much more time to
Right.
tell the stories out. How did that affect you in the edit suite?
Well, I mean, part of it was, I mean, the show is shot a lot like the features. I mean, it isn't shot episode by episode. It's photographed and produced. It's shot based on when the actors are available and what the location is, and to try to trade on efficiencies for sets or particular locations. So if there's a location we go back to, you'd shoot all the material for that location at once. You wouldn't shoot it in order like anything, just to trade on efficiencies. So that process was ongoing, and so we had pieces from all the different episodes coming in at all different times, depended on the day. To some extent, you start eventually shooting out certain parts because they're all collected in a particular area, or you're shooting out that part of the story. So sometimes it starts to get concentrated down on a per episode basis. But by and large, there was one editor for for 2 episodes, and then I helped sort of work on all of them to try to bring those threads together and catch up in areas when things got busy, because we had a lot of footage coming in. We shot, I'm going to get these dates wrong because my brain is a little bit fried from the pandemic year, but basically we went back up with production in September or October-ish, and we had a couple months of production there to finish the show that was after the pause, right? So when that new footage was coming in, there was a lot of material coming in, and it was affecting all the episodes because we were shooting out the remaining material. So we all sort of took our episode and took scenes as they were coming in and worked together, and as we had stuff ready, we presented it to the Marvel team, and the director Kari Skoglund was working on shooting, so she was seeing stuff as she was shooting. But it's everything's kind of going all at once, especially visual effects, which on this show there's some really elaborate ones, and they're very detailed. That work takes time. So we wanted to get that stuff into the pipeline as early as we could, so we get the most bang for our buck at the end of the run and have really beautiful stuff, because there's some really beautiful visual effects work in this show that took some time.
Now, because before you got to Marvel, you were working on many other films. So when you got into working with Marvel, what was something you, I guess, what were some of the challenges that you didn't realize you would have when going into a Marvel project?
Well, that's a good question. People have asked me this before, and I kind of have to say the Marvel process hasn't really been that different than any other filmmaking process I've been involved with. The problems are the same problems, whether you're doing, and by the way, it crosses genres too. I've done romantic comedies, I've done thrillers, I've done dramas, I've done all sorts of different kind of movies. They all have the same demand. It's all the puzzle that you're trying to solve with the storytelling. And the Marvel films, there's a reason I think they're successful as movies and as comic book adaptations. Yes, but they're really good movies. They're like cinematic, which is it's not a coincidence. It's called the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Kevin Feige, who sort of has been guiding this thing. Really, it's always been sort of important that we're making really good movies. They're comic book movies, but they also trade on traditions of cinema. So visual storytelling, great sound, creative and expressive use of music in the storytelling, great acting, great casting, which is Marvel's real. That's the thing that's their secret weapon. If anybody wants to say, why is it so good? It's because their casting's amazing. So anyway, the problem solving is the same. There's no difference. The only difference I would say is not so much about Marvel, but it's about the process of filmmaking in general has evolved dramatically since I started at Marvel, not because of Marvel, but because of the technology. So nonlinear editing, nonlinear visual effects, I shouldn't say nonlinear, but visual effects work has become so much more available. It's not as, you can have a virtual set now. That didn't exist 10 years ago. Virtual sets were too expensive. They were inconceivable because they were so complex. Now we have software that can make them possible. The tracking software, all the things that make modern visual effects possible, those came into play over the last 10 years. And so now you really can do, look at what the Mandalorian's doing with their volume work. It's the production approach is changing. And I think that's been one of the most exciting things for me from a technical side. I've gotten to really play with the new toys, and it's all about storytelling. Just how do you use those to tell stories?
Well, and you talk about the importance of storytelling. One of the things we started to get into was, you were saying you were watching WandaVision, and you started talking about the characters, and you'd worked with this one character for so long, and now you were getting to see other people and how they worked with those character stories. What do you look for in the characters when you're looking at a script or a potential film?
That's a good question. I've worked a lot on the Captain America. I worked on Captain America's trilogy. That's where I started with Marvel on the first Avenger. And so I felt like working on Chris Evans' arc and that storyline was something that was sort of a home base for me. And that character and that actor were important to me. I really identified with that side of the Marvel universe, the Captain America storyline. I found it really interesting. And also the way it started to interact with things that were going on in the world. Tony Stark's arc is such a outgrowth of the post 9/11 world, which is about who are we as weapons makers, and how do we, how is the world, what is the world now, and how do we approach that? His whole story is sort of born from the post 9/11 sort of, shock. And Cap is also some of that, but he started to, with the Cap trilogy, we started to get into the idea of, trusting the government and NSA spying and all these things. And it just sort of really felt like it was connected to the culture in an interesting way. And also Chris's arc from going from the true believer and what America was like in World War II to what it is now after the 60s into the 70s and 80s. What happened to the country while he was frozen was so interesting. And now here's a guy who was formed in the sort of black and white world of World War II in terms of morality, and now he's got to deal with a million shades of gray in our modern world. I love that idea of the Rip Van Winkle story and applying it to the modern times. I thought it was really resonant. So I've been at home in that world, less so in, we get into the Guardians of the Galaxy. Those guys are great. I could, Chris Pratt's funniest guy on earth, I love that stuff, but that was not the corner that I found myself in. So, Wanda is an outgrowth of the Avengers. She's, has a sci-fi component to her powers and so forth, but working on her character on Ultron and then again in Civil War, where she developed even farther. It's, and I feel like we've been, and then of course she has an amazing arc in Infinity War, where she has to make a really difficult choice at the end of that movie, and that's what leads to WandaVision. So having worked on that character with Joe and Anthony Russo on that movie was really, so I was really very interested to see where they went with it, and I was really surprised at how audacious they were with the storytelling techniques, and I thought it was a good one for them to come out of the gate with because it was just such a big swing, and they did such an interesting thing.
Well, it's a crazy swing to think that the first 3 episodes are like, oh, we're going to show you what it was like back in the 50s.
I mean, look, tell you anything. That's the fun thing about streaming in television in general, features too. I mean, it's not, I hate to make it definitions, but one of the fun things about filmmaking is we've all seen a lot of movies in our lives. We grew up with them, and it's not, try something else, because there's so many ways you can approach things. And now there's genres that we're familiar with that you can subvert, combine, you can mix and match. Like all of a sudden you get this notion of combining different styles and genres. That's super fun. It's not, I don't know that it was possible early on, as movies were just forming, those genres were sort of still taking shape. Now we're so used to them. There's rhythms. It's like music, you get used to a pop music rhythm, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, if you're a jazz musician, you can take that and twist it and move it in new ways. You can, each type of music has its own rhythms and its own vibe and its own feel. And movies are the same way, and television the same way. You can combine things and end up with really new, interesting patterns and new ways to tell stories. And then, of course, the culture is always changing, and I think that's where you can take also big chances in terms of how it resonates and what it means. And I think the Falcon show is really, they did a beautiful job of really making that feel like, yes, it's about the blip, and yes, it's about all the things that it's about when you watch that series. I'm not going into any more of it because I'll say I don't want to spoil anything, but it is about what's going on today too. If you watch it, we just went through something that was a really intense global phenomenon where we all had to really realize what things meant.
Mm-hmm. Now, I do want to say before I ask my next question, I really appreciated Captain America and Iron Man's relationship, or Tony Stark's relationship, because they sort of got under each other's skin a bit, and
right.
The way it was sort of played out was really fantastic.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things. I mean, those two guys together have chemistry and deep love for each other. At the same time, they have conflict and love, and that's what those two characters had. So they did an incredible job, and that evolved over the course of their work together. That's, again, it's like casting. You look at these things in movies over the years. In genre movies, I'm just going to grab sort of obvious examples, but like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, Steve and Tony. There are these sort of like things that happen over the course of these movies that and these genre things that are sort of like the chemistry of the actors combined with the chemistry of, or the style of the characters combined with the stories they're in, just makes this sort of these amazing relationships. But those are things we relate to because we have those in our own lives, in different ways.
What I would like to know with Infinity War and Endgame and all that, what were the discussions in the edit suite with the snap? Were you guys worried how people were going to take it? Because that was such a big, going back to taking big swings.
Well, yes. I mean, I think the biggest conversation was about Spidey going, because Tom Holland is a startlingly good actor, as you may know. I mean, he is. I think that guy is untapped potential like you wouldn't believe. And I would say if anybody hasn't seen Cherry, which is this movie that he did with the Russos on Apple right now, I'm not plugging it because I love the Russos and I love Tom. All of those things are true. I'm plugging it because his performance in it is mind blowing. And if you love good acting, Tom Hollinger, man. And I think his performance in the moment where he goes in Endgame is so startling and so raw and real and sort of shockingly out of it's just a very real moment in a science fiction context. But that doesn't matter because you're just experiencing it as an emotional event. And that was the one I think we were like, oh my God, that's going to get people. And it does. I mean, it's the one where you realize how intense this experience is, because it's happening against another character in a relationship that you've been tracking for several movies. So that's where we all thought, oh, we're in trouble in terms of we're really going to get to people here, and they're either going to go with it and it's going to be meaningful to them and they'll come back, or we're not, and they're going to be like, how can you do that to us? And the parents are going to be like, I brought my kid and Spider-Man disappeared. And I mean, that's sort of the thing you think about when you're doing it. I will say that all those fears went away in the moment we went to the theater and watched it. And even in previews, we could tell, I think we had a sense that it was going to work, because the preview audiences who, we previewed those films. Those were not we don't just put them out there. They are tested, not because we want to maximize the product potential of the marketing machine. That's not why we test them. If anybody thinks that's not really why we test them. We test them because your movie's rhythm is affected by the audience. And until you have an audience sitting in that movie, you don't know what that rhythm is, no matter how good you are. Now, there's certain kind of films you don't need to test that are singular vision, works of vision by a director, and certain types of films don't, you could probably put them out and you're good. These really do kind of trade on audience participation, and just in terms of rhythm and reaction. And I like to feel that with an audience before we make all of our final decisions. I don't know that we've ever made seismic decisions about changing movies based on audience reaction. The decisions we change are tiny ones. They're about music and pacing and sound and clarity, and making sure that things that we want to be clear are clear, and also things that we don't want to be clear are obfuscated.
Well, and I feel Paul is, I guess I should call him by his full name. Paul Feig is he's got a vision, right? So it's not like they're gonna be like, oh, this one audience didn't like it, let's rewrite the whole film.
That's not what previews are. Previews are always about like getting a feel for what it's going to feel like, because what you don't want, I mean, I don't know, my feeling is they've been valuable to me at every stage of the process. I don't recall a movie that I've done that we didn't test. There might be one I'm just not remembering, but I've tested every movie that I've edited, and tests have been valuable, even for movies where we didn't need the information about what to do. We just needed confirmation that things were coming across the way we felt they were coming across.
Interesting. Is there a scene in your work that was a difficult scene to tackle initially, but you were able to overcome it and it's become one of your favorite scenes?
Oh my gosh. You mean in the Marvel movies, or just, I guess, in general?
Well, I was going to say in general, but then thinking about the Marvel movies, it'd be interesting to hear that.
Boy, that's a really good question. There's so many that, evolve and sort of come to life when you're editing them with the directors that, it's almost like, it's the exception to the rule is that you have a big moment that just sort of lands and you're good. That just doesn't work that way. The stuff that comes to mind in the Avengers movies, I mean, Tony's demise, spoiler, in Endgame is a very delicate moment. I'm not talking about the snap. I'm talking about with Pepper, Rhodey, and Tom. I mean, that's a very delicate moment, and the calibration of that was really hard. It took a long time to get that to be exactly what it is, and it's very precise right now. I feel like I couldn't move a frame of sound or picture one way or another without it breaking. It was like that delicate, because it comes down to this tiny silent thing, and it's not anything. There's nowhere to hide. There's no big score. It's very intimate. In fact, the score is doing a lot of the work, but in the most incredibly subtle way that Mr. Silvestri was able to achieve and give us the final, he gave us the thing that put it all together. But it's not a big thing. It's a little thing. It's a tiny piano thing that happens. And so that I think was probably one of the harder ones to calibrate, because of the level of detail. Action's tough, and it's always difficult to get it to work so you don't feel like it's too overwhelming, and it's narrative and it's interesting. but it's not as emotional. Authenticity is the really hard thing to calibrate, and those are the ones you remember, I think, because that's just the stuff that stays with you, and it's also the stuff the audience will not buy if it's not right. Like, I don't know what it looks like to have a Leviathan come through a portal and smash into a building in New York City. I guess it looks like what it looks like in Avengers, but I unfortunately do know what it's like to be with somebody when they're at the end of their life, and I do know what it's like to be with somebody that you love who you're never going to see again. All those things are things in the movies that that we know what that feels like, and if we're not, if we haven't delivered that, you're going to be like, no, didn't do it. But space worms and portals, I don't I don't know. You can show me that and I'd be like, okay, fine, yeah, that'd be like what a portal would be like, I guess.
Well, it's also weird because you're probably looking at the footage initially and it's just like people in front of green screen and it's jumping up and nothing is happening and you're like, okay, now I'll cut to this. So you're trying to sort of
Well, we usually plan. I mean, that's just planned to some extent because the actors need to see a visualized version of it to understand what they're doing. Because some of it's, and you also they have to occupy the correct space for some of that stuff. So a lot of that stuff is it's really interesting how the visual effects people plan that stuff out. It is really carefully planned so the actors aren't lost. And then other times we make stuff from nothing, and we do build those things. But I would say there's a lot of planning that goes into that stuff. So I'm not usually in the dark. I'm usually kind of have some idea of what it's going to look like. And then we do a lot of work temporarily sort of sketching in what those environments will look like so that as we're editing, we don't edit in the whole movie isn't green screen for long. It's usually within a few days of being photographed, we start putting backgrounds
in. Okay. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, Paul Feig is very much has
yeah, he's so good.
A vision. Was there any time where you were like, I don't know if this is going to work, and then you were like, whoa, that really worked and came together in terms of his vision?
Well, I have never worked with Paul, but I am a huge fan of his movies. But the idea with the directors I have worked with, I mean, they are all they are very collaborative in pre-production, which I think is critical on these films for visual effects movies. Pre-production is so critical because sometimes I'm trying to think of a good example, but let me think of one that would make sense. Oh, well, the scene in Endgame when everybody comes back, which is a famous, moment, and it's all memed up and everybody loves it. That is not something that we had figured out when we were initially shooting the movie. That took a long time to calibrate and figure out how we were going to do that. And it was something we went back and built over the course of, we shot some of it in the initial production phase, then we went back for additional photography. We built that sequence, and it was very tricky to get it to work in a way that didn't feel like it was, we didn't want to make it seem like it was, we wanted it to give its appropriate emotional scale, but we also wanted it to feel, epic and emotional and we didn't want to overdo it, but at the same time, you can't underdo that. And musically, visually, all those things, it took months to figure that out, and then it took months to achieve it. Those big moments can be very tricky, but the directors make you a partner on that. So we had those conversations from when it was written until we shot it, until we finished the movie, and even until we went to the theater to see it with an audience, we were still talking about how it would work. So I think that conversation with the director is really, that's where I never feel lost on these movies, because I have directors who carry me along. They are they're your guide, and you've got to trust them, because I can't go, no, we should do it this way. I have to go, what are you guys doing? What story are you telling? Let me help you tell your story. If I start telling my story, then and the producer's telling his story, I'm telling my story, actor's telling her story, director's telling his story. That's garbage. You're going to end up with nothing. You need, everybody contributes. One person, or in the case of Joe and Anthony, two people form a vision that is the guiding vision. And then the movie sort of takes on its own life at that point. It almost takes the director's vision and becomes its own thing. And then you serve the movie, and they serve the movie, and all of a sudden there's this thing you all made that's bigger than all of you. And you bow down before that because it will not let you do the wrong thing. It won't work. You'll watch it and go, oh, that doesn't work. Like, there's things that just objectively don't work in a movie because that's not the story you've been telling. And right away, oh, I haven't solved the puzzle yet.
Now, I have a question online for you, and this comes from Riley. If you were going to be a guest programmer on Turner Classic Movies, what would your essential films be that you'd recommend everyone watch?
Wow, that's a great question. Boy, well, for me, the movies that I go back to again and again and again to learn about filmmaking, if that's what you're talking about, is certainly, there's a movie called The Conversation, which is Francis Coppola made in 1974. It's one of my favorite movies. I think there's so much to learn from that movie about how to make a film and how to write a movie and how to act in a movie and how to cut it, how to do sound, how to do music, cinematography, composition, everything. It's an incredible, amazingly valuable film to watch. There's a movie by William Friedkin called Sorcerer from 1977, which is a really terrific movie. If you haven't seen it, it kind of got squashed when it was released because it came out the week before Star Wars and bombed and nobody knew about it. But in the years since, there's a great Blu-ray out on it, which I highly recommend seeing. It also is a incredible visual storytelling in that movie. Not a lot of dialogue, but you follow the movie using, with visual storytelling. So that's something that I look at a lot also for inspiration. I know it's a cliche and it's kind of almost like crazy to say it, but I watched it again about a month ago. But Citizen Kane's an amazing movie. You can watch it right now and you will think you're watching a movie about Donald Trump, but it's not. It's amazingly still relevant. I mean, it's about a guy living in Florida, doesn't know what happened to his life. I mean, I think you could watch it, but that movie has so much technique for you to learn. And it's so weirdly timeless. Same way as The Wizard of Oz, which I also saw recently. Looks like it was made yesterday. And then the last one I'll say is Alien, which is another movie that was made. I can't believe it. That's a movie that was made in the 70s. It looks like it was made 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And it still holds up on every level. And Sigourney Weaver's performance in that movie is one of the great movie performances of all time. It is astonishingly subtle and amazing. And I can watch it and learn about acting from her every time it's on. So, I mean, those are the things that I look at. And then there's a million others. I mean, I could watch The Godfather on a loop. There's so many things that, but those are kind of my go-tos in terms of like some classics that I go back to time and time again.
Well, in Citizen Kane, anytime, like I always tell people, like everything we watch or experience now, it has been influenced by it, like deep focus and like, the way they.
I mean, Spielberg's whole career is like, it's so filtered through that lens of filmmaking style. I mean, he's, by the way, one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. I worship his films. I love Spielberg movies. I put any of those on too, by the way, and I'm super happy to watch those, even the ones that are kind of crazy. Like, some are I'm not so wild about, but I still learn something from him. He's an incredible filmmaker. I kind of go filmmakers more than movies, I guess. Like I love Spielberg. I love Lucas Coppola, Friedkin, that's sort of who and also for contemporary people, like, I can't not watch a Sofia Coppola movie. I think she's incredibly talented. I know her dad's Francis Coppola, but I think she's an amazing filmmaker. She's one of my favorite filmmakers.
Wow. Now I have one last question for you, and it kind of is similar to the one that I just asked from Riley, but because we've been in this quarantine, or we've been, in this pandemic for a year and a bit now, what have you seen on the streaming services that you would recommend people check out? Because everyone's sort of exhausting their streaming service options now. So what would you recommend?
Wow. I mean, unfortunately, I don't have a ton of time to watch stuff because I'm working on it. So it's hard for me to, like, I usually read or something to relax because I've spent so much time watching stuff at work as I'm editing it. And there's so much about that going on. I do like to, I like to see movies in theaters more than I like to watch them at home. That's just how I grew up. But I will say, when I was on location on the last movie I did, my assistant said, "Hey, let's watch these." I hadn't seen this movie Hereditary by this guy Ari Aster, and another movie called Midsommar by the same director. These are horror movies, contemporary horror movies, and they're great. They're so good. I was completely hooked. So I saw those two. They're not for everybody. They're very upsetting. They're definitely rated R. There's some very challenging material in them. The use of music and photography and pacing and editing, but most importantly, acting is so well done. If you're a fan of horror films, which I am, they're great. And those are not streaming things. They're, movies that were made as features, but I just happened to catch them on streaming. As far as series go, there's a series that Todd DeRosier, who cut some of Falcon and Winter Soldier with me he did some episodes on that with me. He worked on a show called Tales from the Loop, which is on Amazon. I highly recommend that show. One episode was directed by Mark Romanek, who's one of my favorite directors. Got the chance to work with him like a long time ago, but that show, and it was produced by Matt Reeves, who is directing the Batman movie right now. But that show, it's called Tales from the Loop. It's on Amazon. I think it's what do you call it? It's a forgotten gem. It came out, saw it, but boy, check it out. It is good. It's really good. You will be hooked.
It's
like
all
that.
tone.
Oh, God, it's amazing. I was just sitting there like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I was just riveted the whole time. It's beautifully done. I highly recommend that one.
Have you seen The Witch or The Vitch, with the 2 V's?
I haven't, but The Lighthouse is amazing.
Yeah.
And I would not, do not stop and see The Lighthouse. But again, not for the kids. It's rated R. There's some challenging stuff and upsetting stuff. If you're easily upset, don't watch it. But Willem Dafoe in that movie unpacks like you have never seen Willem Dafoe unpack. I mean, it is the most incredible like dance that those two actors do. Pattinson's great in it too. It's a great movie. The sound's amazing. So turn off the lights, turn up the sound, watch the whole thing. Don't stop. Get in the mode. But I love that movie. I haven't seen The Witch, whatever it's called. I haven't seen that one. But that guy also, Eggers, I think is his name. Brilliant new. I should say new. He's done a couple movies, but these guys are making like contemporary horror, and it's super exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview.
Oh my gosh, it was so fun. Thank you for having me on. I'm really honored to be on, and I hope we can do it again.
Thanks, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.